This is Adam from Bene Studio. I am the CTO of the team of the company, and we are building React Native applications, React Web applications, and Node.js backend. We mainly use serverless technologies, and basically we provide full stack solutions to both startups and large companies as well. So that's about the team, and basically today Essam is gonna have a speech about React Native, specifically about Expo. You may have heard about React Native. Who has heard about React Native before? And about Expo? Yeah, so basically you may be interested in the boundaries of Expo. So basically this talk is gonna be about this topic, and after the talk we can have a personal discussion as well, and Q&A session to reach more deeply into the topic. So I would like to ask Essam to give the talk in this unusual form, but we will hope it works well. So basically that's for the next 15 minutes. So Essam, I would like to ask you to give the talk, please.
So first, hello everybody. I'm Essam. I'm a JavaScript engineer at Bene Studio. Mainly I work with React and React Native and other JavaScript technologies for about 2 years now. Developed multiple applications from different natures. And as Adam explained, at Bene Studio, we like building modern web applications and mobile applications using JavaScript, Node.js, and cutting-edge technologies. And also, that is why I would like to share today my experience building a React Native application with React Native and Expo. So for those of you who are familiar with React Native is a JavaScript framework that lets you build native applications. That is native, not hybrid applications like other frameworks like Ionic, for example. React Native lets you build those applications using native UI building blocks, and then you can control that with your JavaScript, and it lets you do that almost from A to Z without having to use anything from any other library or something. And the topic of this presentation is Expo, and to discuss Expo a bit, Expo is not its own framework, it's not its own library, it's built on top of React Native itself. So Expo uses React Native, and it has its own way of building a mobile application using React Native. So as the Expo team themselves label it, it's the fastest way to build an app. That is because Expo gives you a very, very good head start on building your application. It gives you a native SDK that lets you have almost all features that you can use when you're building a React Native app. That is like a camera, the Firebase, for example, the maps. You can use any feature that you can embed into a React Native application, and it's working right out of the box in Expo. Expo also provides you with a cloud-based build service. You can build your applications on the cloud and then just receive the download link. So there is no need for you to have both separate iOS and another machine for building Android apps, for example. Not to mention that they also have an over-the-air code push service out of the box. And for those who don't know what that is, basically when you release an application and you have a bug fix or an update or something, you don't really have to update the application on the Play Store and wait for your users to update. You can actually push the code you have, and it will just update without any interference from your user. So, what is the difference between developing an application using React Native and developing the application using Expo? So, as I have explained earlier, React Native lets you build a real native application. So, from time to time, you will have to use native libraries for some features. To name some, for example, Firebase, maps, sound recording, or any other feature of that kind. And when you're doing that, that takes you a bit of time to link those libraries into your application. It also takes time to test them, because sometimes that functionality might not face dependency issues when linking your application. And what Expo does is basically gives you all of that working right out of the box. You don't need to link anything. You don't have access to the native code at all. They have their own native SDK integrated into your application, and it's working right out of the box. But also, Expo is different when you're developing your application itself. Because when you're developing an Expo application, you don't really compile the code, the native code, I mean. You don't really compile it and run it on your device. No, instead, Expo has an Expo client application. That is an application that you download from the Play Store or from the App Store, and you run your JavaScript that is hosted locally on your machine while you're developing. You run that on the Expo client, and you have a working application for development. So far, to sum it up, the difference is Expo doesn't let you touch the native code, and React Native requires you to play around with the native code to achieve the functionality that you need. So I'm going to share now my own experience building a React Native project using React Native and Expo. And I'm going to give a bit of a talking about the project itself and the issues that I encountered as I used Expo to build that project. Now, for starters, the project itself was a regular commercial application. It was a food delivery service aimed for both platforms, iOS and Android. The features in the application itself were features that you usually encounter in everyday usage, like push notifications and a chat for customer support, just regular API calls to display the data on the UI. So the application itself was built, and the stack chosen for it was Expo version 18 specifically, and React Native. And for starters, at the beginning, everything was actually going very smoothly. The application's development was going very well, and everything was running smoothly. That is until we encountered the first issue, which is actually a bit weird to name an issue, but the issue was basically to build that application. Now, I explained earlier that when you're developing Expo application in your development environment, you're using the Expo. You download an application called the Expo client and run your JavaScript code inside of it. We did that throughout the whole development phase. And then later, when we had to build that application for a demo, basically we browsed the documentation on Expo's website, and documentation stated that you need to use a tool called EXP. We downloaded that tool and we used it to build the application. And then we downloaded the built standalone application, and what we got was this. Simply, the application was not able to run, and we were given that blue screen. And that blue screen, after further investigation, simply was because the version support was dropped. Version 18 of Expo was no longer usable. Now, usually when you encounter such an issue in any development environment in general, you have to upgrade the version you're using. So that's what we did, and we upgraded to version 21. And when we did upgrade to version 21 and we ran the application in development environment, it gave us a blank white screen. There was no errors, there was nothing in the console, there was nothing. And we had to deliver that application working on the same night. That was kind of a trap. It was actually a nightmare because there was actually no solution that we could find on the web or anywhere. Everybody would tell you to just upgrade, and when you did, you simply couldn't run your application. Now, to work around this, we used the Expo's publish service. Expo has that service called publish, and simply you publish, and you use the Expo client to run your application on their, hosted on their cloud. When you do that, simply you are not really building your application. You are just running your code from an online store. It was a workaround and it did its purpose. It seemed to work well. And still, we had to fully fix that issue because that was just a workaround and keep going around running your application inside the Expo client. Later on, we found out something that is really weird, which was version 21 that gave you a white blank screen and development environment was actually working after you built. So after we built the same version, we had a working application in a standalone or in a production environment. So the same code that would not give anything in development environment was actually working in production, and that was a very, very weird thing to encounter. So we tackled that issue, we solved that, and then we hopped to another one. Now, as I mentioned before, this project included chat for the customer support. And there was a specific chat service that the company had subscribed to, and they had a plugin for React Native. When we tried to use that plugin for that chat service, we found out that there was no way to do it without linking your native code to it. Now, as I mentioned before, with React Native, you can actually link your native code. You can make modifications. But when you're using Expo, there's no way you can do that. And that was kind of a trap, again, because you had to integrate that service, but at the same time, there was no way to do it. And that kind of, let's say, it kind of just made a very, very, very big issue because we had to reschedule everything. That task was supposed to be, for example, done at the very beginning in the project, and what you had to do then was just reschedule it and let it be in the end of the project because you had to put some native code in the whole Expo system. And to do that, you have to get out of Expo, which is called detaching. And when we encountered that, we let that task just be delayed until the end of the project so we can just run into something else, which was a simple issue on Android. Now, on Android, when we uninstalled the application, there was a weird thing that is, it kept the user's data. You still had the items in the cart, you still had your login, everything was still active. And that was not supposed to be the behavior as specified by the client themselves. So when the client found out that after they reinstalled the application, they still had the login implemented, the login kept in there, and they could find the cart with the same state that they left it before they installed the application, they complained that simply they just wanted everything removed with the uninstallation of the app. And when we actually tried to find out how that is done, it was simply a very, very little thing. That is, there was an Android key that you put in the Android manifest, and then you build your application and it's done. But again, with Expo, that is not possible because with Expo, you cannot touch the native code. And Android manifest is, of course, part of that. So again, we were trapped in the issue of having to let everything be delayed. You start rescheduling your whole application because you want everything to be left to the end when you can actually start modifying that native code. And until then, you want to play around with the Expo code that you already have. And as we progressed and started to actually use with what we have and do with what we have, we found out that, again, we couldn't build the application. The was dropped out of support again. So even after you did that, even after you fixed the first issue by having that weird white screen in development mode and having it working in production mode, now we tried to upgrade for a version that is earlier than 21. And what we had now was the same blank white screen. But the problem was when we built it in production mode, it still didn't run. And the only solution we had by that time, after running into all of these issues, was that we had to detach out of Expo itself. To make it clear, basically, we ran into a situation where every step we took kind of was a nightmare. Because then every feature you try to implement has something that has to do with native code, or basically you're just trapped with the Expo's build system. You can't build your own application. And that is when we decided that we had to detach out of Expo. And when we did that, actually everything was resolved. We ended up detaching out of Expo. We started using just Android and iOS code, native code that is. We could fix all the issues we had. We could implement whatever features we wanted to implement. And that in itself cannot be the true judge of Expo. I mean, when you're talking about Expo, the guys have done a good job providing you with a native SDK and with some services on the cloud out of the box working for you. But you still had that need to implement your own features and edit your own native code. That was the kind of trap that we were put in when we were developing using Expo, and that is that we had, in the end, to detach out of Expo. So, I would like to conclude now the whole experience that we faced with Expo while we were building the application. So, on the upside, Expo is much faster when you're building. And as they called it, it's the fastest way to build an app. Because Expo gives you all of these features out of the box. It lets you save time of compiling yourself. Even sometimes it would just save you the time of even installing the SDK, for example, for the Android native SDK. You don't have to do that. It gives you all of these features out of the box. You don't really do a lot of native linking. You don't do much of that. It lets you build online, so not much hassle with all of that local configuration of a build environment. And also gives you out-of-the-box code pushing, as I explained before. That is, you have over-the-air updates to your application without any interference by you. On the downside, I think the main, let's call it the main aspect of Expo that distinguishes it from React Native itself is that they don't let you touch the native code. And that is a very, very big issue from my own point of view, because you will end up needing to edit your native code. And unfortunately, after you progress into Expo, you'll find out that when you actually need to do that, you will not find a way to do it. You will end up having to detach, which is kind of why did I use Expo in the first place. Another thing is the excessive permissions. Now, I have explained that Expo's native SDK allows you to reach the camera, the contacts, the sound, the microphone. That also means that when you install an Expo application, the native SDK has access to all features in your phone. It has access to all sensors. It has access to everything. So when your user is installing an Expo application, they will see a list of the native things that it has access to, and it's very, very too much a bit. because you're using every feature your phone can provide without any other options of limiting that. You cannot select which permissions you want your application to use when you're developing an Expo application, because it will have to use every single one of them. Size, because in Expo, the same thing, which is the native SDK is embedded into your application, and there is no way of cutting it short. You cannot configure it, you cannot compile it yourself. It has to be in its big, massive size. Actually, the application I was working on was itself shouldn't have reached 1 megabyte, and I ended up with an application that was 33 megabytes without even large assets or anything. There was mostly nothing in the application, but I still had to use old permissions. I still had that big size for the application, and that was not at all convenient. Now, to conclude that a bit, there is no telling whether Expo itself is good or bad. Expo has a job, and it's entitled to that job, and it does it well. But the thing is, do you really need Expo? Or do you know for sure that all the features in your application will not need anything outside of Expo? Will you not need to touch the native code? I think that mainly is the main judge of when to use Expo and when not to use Expo. And to wrap up, it's your decision in the end, and pick wisely. Now, thanks everybody.
Yeah, so feel free to ask anything from Essam, and basically I will help to him to understand. So basically, if you have any questions regarding this topic.
How much time did you lose because of these issues?
Okay, so basically the question is, how much time did you lose because of these issues?
Days. That's been days fixing that. It was really too much for the issues. There was too much time spent on that.
Yeah, but was it because Expo was not mature enough at that point and it was pretty much evolving? Or was it that the development time was that big that the older versions have been deprecated?
So could you repeat in two pieces?
So what was the reason? Was it because Expo was not mature enough?
Yes, so what was the reason? Wasn't Expo mature enough, or
The development time was that long that the older versions of Expo had been deprecated?
Or the development time was so long that the older versions of Expo were deprecated?
The thing is, a lot of features in Expo itself is beta. For example, even the build service, even though it's an old feature in Expo, it's still in beta. So I don't think it was because of that Expo was not yet ready for production. It was mainly because Expo itself is kind of, let's say, it holds you to a specific thing, which is not being able to use the native code. But at the same time, those features were supposed to be working. I mean, you cannot have a development environment that gives you a blank white screen without any console logs or anything. So I think just maybe it was because Expo itself was not ready, but I was kind of using the latest version back then. For now, I have not used the latest version of Expo, but still, it's I think it's still kind of buggy when it comes to specific aspects, because people still complain about things when I explore the forums and so on. But of course, it's up to you. You should also do your own testing, I believe so.
Was it an answer? Yeah, cool.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Can you use community-created modules in Expo?
Can you use community-created modules in Expo?
You can use them as long as they don't touch the native code. There is no linking. You can't use React linking.
Is it an answer?
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, if there is no other question, then I would like to add few thoughts. At Bene Studio we done a couple of React Native projects, and a few of them involved Expo as well, and basically some of them were initially written by the client, or we decided to use Expo, but at the end all the projects were ejected from the Expo. So basically it's I see this as a proof that it is not really mature or usable enough to build production apps. So basically we were always forced to move outside of Expo regarding production code, of course. It's a really good tool for prototyping, demoing, and exploring a lot of things, but at the end we always had to eject from that. Yeah. Okay, any other questions regarding that? Okay, if not, thank you, Essam. It worked quite well, and basically I would send you some of the pizza, but it's a bit difficult. So yeah, but next time we will share it. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Essam.
Thanks. Good evening, everybody.